Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webcast, How Cloud Vendors are Addressing Demand for Increased Access, Improved Management, and More, recapping performance as reported in our cloud public reports and profiles, and explaining the factors influencing the public cloud market. My name is Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's webinar. In the next 45 minutes, Analyst Jillian Mirandi and Senior Analyst Allan Krans will walk you through the trends driving the results and how vendors have fared over the last quarter, followed by Q&A of these trends and how they will affect you. Before I pass this over to Jillian and Allan, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A function or the chat function to the right of your screen. Allan and Jillian will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to Allan and Jillian at the end of the presentation to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And we'll be sharing all the social media links with you at the end of the presentation, so if you didn't catch them now, we'll have them for you again later on. And with that, let me introduce Jillian Mirandi and Allan Krans. Jillian has spearheading our public cloud research and is the lead author of this program. Allan has been covering and writing about the software market for over 7 years and is leading our research coverage in private hybrid cloud. Together, their strategic advice is helping several of the largest cloud vendors identify new opportunities and revenue streams. And with that, let me hand this over to Allan.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for joining. So as we get into today's presentation, I want to take a step back and put some context around the insights that you'll see today, because it's a fairly interesting time in the overall market. We're looking at cloud very holistically, and you can see some of our research streams up in front of you. But to provide some of the research that we're getting back through our recent adoption studies, I think it really speaks to the change that we see occurring in the public cloud space and that Jillian will highlight. Because when we look at it holistically and look at the multitude of options around cloud that are available to customers now, it's no longer just a public cloud play. There are multiple flavors of private cloud options available to customers. There are hybrid integration capabilities that continue to grow and expand. And in that context, we're seeing an environment with public cloud that has shifted from a growth through new customer wins, new customer adoption. We're seeing fairly stable adoption rates in terms of the percentage of customers that are using public cloud. And so that actually shifts the opportunity for the vendors from just getting new customers started with this technology to going deeper, to looking for additional workloads, use cases, expanding capacity and capability, and changes the competitive dynamics in the public cloud space much more to a mature type market where there is a lot more direct comparison between vendors, and the features are becoming much deeper. And we've seen that in multiple different areas. Jillian will hit later on the instance of that around vertical clouds, so building out specific capabilities rather than going with a horizontal play is one evidence point for this shift in market as we see, and that will continue as the landscape moves from a new customer acquisition standpoint to a real competitive environment where customers most have already adopted a public cloud solution. It's about changing across vendors and looking for additional use cases within their environment. That's going to be the route for growth and success for the vendors in the space that we see going forward. And that's a fairly significant shift over the last decade, where we've really seen this market grow and expand to this point in its maturity. So with that context, just to orient you a little bit, to the ways that we're covering and analyzing cloud. First is looking at the business vendor reports. We're publishing those on a semi-annual basis, 23 vendors, so fairly exhaustive coverage that goes deep into each of those individual providers. With the benchmarks, we'll cover today the public cloud space, but we're also speaking about the multitude of options available for customers. We're seeing private cloud, multiple different variations of that, whether it's totally off-site for the customer, whether it's a mixed model, but having that managed capability is a growing opportunity for a lot of the SIs and other cloud providers, so we're covering that in our second cloud benchmark. And then lastly, we're building out these views for publication in December, but looking at the market to be made in selling hardware and software infrastructure into both the public cloud and the private cloud environments. Huge market opportunity. It fits very well with the traditional IT business model, and so that's something that a lot of vendors are looking to exploit and capitalize on. Are the hardware capabilities and software capabilities don't go away. It's just a different buyer environment, so we're going to be covering that with that last benchmark. Lastly, so those two are really vendor-centric views. We are combining that with customer research, selling private, hybrid, professional services publications that look at, from the customer perspective, what's shifting in the market. That's really where we're seeing that change in adoption behavior from within the public cloud space. So it all feeds on itself, but we do publish separate full reports around the customer perception of vendors, their buying behavior, planned adoptions, budgeting, all the things that really underlie the overall market opportunity to provide that holistic picture of what's going on in the cloud space. So with that background and setup, I will hand it over to Jillian, and we'll dive deep into the public cloud developments over the last quarter.
Thanks, Allan, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. To start off, I wanted to give a quick snapshot of the global public cloud market and its growth over time. The cloud market will reach, or the public cloud market will reach $110 billion over the next 5 years, with the majority coming from applications, but with infrastructure as a service and platform as a service growing at increasing rates. Now, we see the growth really continuing and actually increasing over the next few years, driven by maturity in North America and more widespread adoption in Western Europe, Australia, a few other regions in APAC, as well as Latin America.
And the other interesting thing to note is, we talk about public cloud obviously taking place in a landscape of different cloud options. If you look at the distribution of the public cloud market, it's actually, from what we've seen, significantly different for the private cloud space. And whereas you look at the PaaS layer for public cloud, not really the biggest segment of the market, fairly stable as a middle ground glue point we see for the applications and the vendors that are providing those platforms to have some stickiness and encourage development on those. However, when you look at from the private cloud adoption space, and this highlights some of the differences in use cases and workloads, it's a much more significant portion of the market in terms of adoption, in terms of the workloads that are being used. And that speaks to the control that customers want to maintain with a lot of the custom development, and that for a lot of that work, we're seeing private cloud is actually a better fit for the type of delivery requirements that they're looking for with the development workloads. And so obviously, we expect growth looking at it from the public cloud side. However, you will see more options crop up, more adoption, we believe, on the private cloud side that ultimately, will impact the market opportunity for public cloud. So there's certainly an interplay at work, and we're seeing more of those kind of workload alignments being solidified as customers increase the adoption of private cloud solutions, ultimately move towards hybrid environments, but certainly there's impacts on both sides of the market. It's not just an either or, it really is a holistic approach a lot of customers are taking to cloud.
So that was an overall market view. Now let's take a deeper dive into the leading public cloud vendors in 2Q13. So first, let me orient you to this graph. The x-axis is year-to-year dollar revenue in the public cloud. The y-axis is year-to-year public cloud percentage growth. And the size of the bubble is the volume of public cloud revenue in the quarter. Also to note, in this graph we're just showing the top 23 vendors, and we chose them because these are the vendors that have generated $200 million or more over the last 4 quarters. So we cover 50 vendors in this benchmark. This is the top 23. Now the interesting thing that has happened probably this quarter and last that we've noticed is that the 3 different groups, so the laggards, the up-and-coming players, and the leaders, they've really began to move away from each other. So last year at this time, there was a lot of vendors that were hugged right up against that y-axis, and then the same 3 leaders. But now we're really seeing, as the market matures, the disruptors are continuing to disrupt and grow, so that would be a Workday and ServiceNow. The leaders are pulling away, and the laggards, for the most part, are staying the same. So we'll go a little into each of these buckets.
And so when you think about the change that we're highlighting in the market, certainly, as the growth shifts from new customer adoption to vendor switching and additional workloads, the competitive environment really changes, and it's an opportunity for both up-and-coming players, laggards, to look to displace those vendors in the leader area. Customers are not necessarily going to be tied to a single platform, particularly as things like standards and portability become much more solidified in the market. It opens up that opportunity for targeting those large customer bases, for shifting the balance of power in the cloud market overall. So we don't necessarily think that this is a sealed market in any respect, and that we think competition and change will actually increase over the next couple of years.
So these are the 3 leaders, and these vendors have remained leaders for the past few years, but as Allan mentioned, definitely some room to grow. So what I wanted to highlight here is how the leaders are really growing even more quickly than they have been in the past. So Salesforce, due to their subscription model, they grow around 27 to 30% every quarter. And they've been able to continue to do that based on very fast, or based on a high volume of new customer acquisition, but also from their expanding portfolio. So they did very well with CRM, and more recently they now have HR solutions, marketing solutions, and in the quarter they bundled a few of these solutions together to offer a front-end as a service with coaching capabilities and social capabilities, as well as the development platform. So we see Salesforce continuing on this around 30% growth. Microsoft has rapidly increased its growth from around 30% in 2Q12 to more around 40 or 50% this quarter. That's really due to refreshes of Office 365. So Microsoft, their customers every few years will get the new Office, and now they're selling a lot of the cloud solutions to that customer base. As well as they've really solidified the strategy around Azure. So Azure is not only a platform, they also released an infrastructure as a service solution, I believe in April. So that's really helped to speed their growth. And I think most interestingly is Amazon Web Services. So AWS really made the infrastructure as a service market. It's by far the biggest. It's growing very quickly. But over the past year, it's expanded its portfolio and also expanded vertically. So you can see where in the year-ago quarter, it was right at the beginning of that arrow. It's really began to quickly move away from the pack. The next group is the laggards. Again, these companies have more or less stayed in this position over the last year, but we have seen some breakouts with companies like Google and Fujitsu. at&T has began slipping into this category over the last quarter or so, and we think that's due to lack of a real concrete strategy and awareness. It is one of the larger infrastructure as a service players, and it has platform as well. So we think, once it starts going to market with a, more solidified message, then it has the chance to really break out. We expect some vendors such as HP and Cisco to stay in this bucket, and that's really because public cloud isn't their main focus. So these vendors will make their cloud money from private cloud, professional services, and a lot of cloud components, so the hardware and the servers that enables their customers to offer cloud. However, we do think vendors such as Citrix and, again, at&T will be able to move to the up-and-coming bucket as their cloud strategies and go-to-market solidify and, they expand their sales teams. Vendors like Rackspace are kind of stuck in the middle at this point. Rackspace has been doing a lot of investment in its platform, so it's fully an OpenStack-based cloud. However, they don't offer the professional services like an IBM, and they're not as low cost and functional as an Amazon. So they've been kind of stuck in this position, and we actually think they're a likely acquisition target for one of the larger traditional vendors. And this last bucket is the up-and-coming players. So this bucket is made up of pure-play vendors such as Workday, ServiceNow, Zoho, Joyent, who now that the public cloud market is really maturing, they're rapidly growing. $200 million over the last 4 quarters is significant revenue for companies. For some of them are just a few years old. The biggest mover is Google. So last year at this time, they were down in that laggards bucket. And since then, they've invested quite a lot into their cloud platform. I think the biggest thing they've done is wrap a business layer around their different cloud products, tying them together to form a solution. So we hear this a lot from the traditional vendors, and Google is notorious for having many, many products, some of which it keeps, some of which it doesn't. So it makes the enterprise customers pretty nervous. But I think they've really, wrapped their products together. They've killed free apps for SMBs. They've partnered with vendors like HP and Red Hat to expand into the enterprise. And they've also increased their support and professional services, as well as released Google Compute Engine, their infrastructure as a service, to the broader market. So we see them, their growth will begin to slow, but we see them as a key player that could potentially move into the leaders. Fujitsu is another vendor who slowly and steadily is moving out of that laggard category into the up-and-coming player bucket. And we think that's due to their global presence. So now that, again, the market's pretty mature in North America, but Western Europe, Australia, APAC are really starting to get more on board with cloud, and Fujitsu has great presence in those areas. So we think that the Fujitsu is really going to pull out due to its global presence. And finally, IBM we think they're going to probably be in the leader category by this time next year. Both IBM and Oracle have made significant investments in the space and have started to base their business around cloud. So it's not just an add-on or an aside anymore. It's a big part of their strategy. And they have such broad distribution and channel presence, we think once they release a solution, they just expand extremely quickly. So we think IBM at least, potentially Oracle will move into that leader category. So what's next in terms of acquisitions? We think that the pure play infrastructure as a service vendors are very likely acquisition targets. So similar to IBM's acquisition of SoftLayer, we think that large vendors, potentially Intel, HP, if Dell wanted to get back into the space, we think they, instead of building it themselves, would want to acquire pure play, pretty big vendors like GoGrid, Joyent, and Rackspace. That way they would protect their customer base from moving to other infrastructure as a service players. They would immediately get cloud enabling data centers and immediately get pretty broad customer bases. We also think cloud management will be a hot space. Dell acquired Stratus, and we think RightScale is probably the next vendor who will be acquired, but the price tag will be quite high. So now that we've covered the market and the quarter, how the vendors did, I want to get into a bit more of the specific trends that happened in the quarter that will really drive future growth. So the three major things that we see happening are industry-specific clouds, so customizing around specific industries such as healthcare and the federal sector. Mobile, so investment in mobile backends to really access data from anywhere. And then public cloud infrastructure as a service expansion to shield customers from moving to other vendors. The first topic we'll get into is the industry customization. So this is something that's been happening probably for the last year or so. We saw a lot of gov clouds or federal clouds. And those initially, it was out of a data center who just offered clouds to the public sector. But now with FedRAMP, we're seeing that vendors are really investing to meet more compliances and more regulations. These vendors include Amazon, Dell, Verizon, IBM, and Microsoft, to name a few. Now, all of these vendors have been in the public space for quite a while, but now are adding certifications, so namely FedRAMP. They're adding go-to-market strategies, and they're also expanding their vertical teams. So the first vendor I wanted to start with is Verizon. Now, we think for the public cloud vendors, Verizon is the farthest along in their industry-specific strategy. So they've had a Fed cloud for quite a while. Around half of Terramark's cloud customers were in the public space. So they immediately were pretty entrenched in the government. And now in last October, they announced HIPAA compliancy. So since then, they've been really building out their cloud. They actually have rebuilt it from the ground up to add many more controls, so people can control performance and SLAs. They can prioritize or deprioritize workloads. So that's extremely important for the healthcare and the federal space. Verizon also signs BAAs, and more recently, they received the FDA clearance, which means that they can collect data from patients who are at home. So they can collect nutrition data, really anything that these patients are hooked up to, because that will give the doctors the most up-to-date data. Next, I wanted to highlight Box. So Box is a smaller content collaboration and content sharing platform. And initially, we thought they were going to be more of a horizontal play, but over the past couple months since April, they've really been getting into the healthcare space. So in April, they announced that they were HIPAA and high-tech compliant. They announced their first 10 healthcare partners. They They invested in an EHR platform made for the iPad, and they also brought on board Google Health founder Missy Krasner to really drive this initiative. And lastly, I'd like to highlight Microsoft. And again, these are more quarterly happenings. There are many, many more vendors that are entrenched in these verticals, but this is highlighting the more recent moves. So what Microsoft is doing is integrating its products to create vertically targeted solutions within federal and life sciences most recently. They launched City Next in 2Q13, which rebrands Office 365 and Azure with a public sector specific wrapper. The public sector initiative will drive growth across Microsoft's cloud as cities modernize infrastructure and processes. Similarly, in June, Microsoft announced that Azure and Office 365 achieved GXP qualifications, which allow them to meet regulatory requirements for life science organizations. So again, Microsoft, life science is a newer vertical for vendors to get into, for cloud vendors to get into, and we think Microsoft is ahead of the game here and further has an advantage since it does offer applications, platform, and infrastructure as a service. The next topic I want to touch on is mobile backend as a service. So we hear a lot about mobile in the cloud space. More tablets are being purchased than laptops. So it's just a huge driving factor. But to go a little bit deeper, I wanted to highlight mobile backend as a service to really extend cloud capabilities. So what mobile backend as a service is, it's a platform that connects cloud backends, so cloud storage and data, to mobile front ends. So what it allows vendors and developers to do is more easily develop mobile applications and mobile front ends and automatically connect and manage all of the data with the cloud backends. So it's a secure platform to develop on where you don't have to write an extreme amount of code to connect to these different clouds. So there's two different ways that vendors are getting into mobile backend as a service. The first way is through partnering with a few key pure play vendors. So Kinvi, FeedHenry, and StackMob are really who we think is leading the market. These vendors have connected with very well-known large enterprise players, so Google, Red Hat, HP, more innovative vendors like MuleSoft. So that's really helping to earn them a space. And we think that these vendors, they're likely acquisition targets, but we also think that they have the opportunity to grow themselves quite successfully, acting as that third-party mobile platform layer. The next way that vendors are getting into it is to develop it themselves. So as you see on the right, it's the largest vendors, so really the leading vendors that are developing it as opposed to partnering. And we think that this is happening because these vendors, they already have very large developer communities, and they want to protect their developer community and also differentiate. So if they develop these backend platforms themselves, it'll work the best with their solution, and therefore will keep their developers loyal. They're also releasing a lot of SDKs to really help developers more easily develop applications. In April, Salesforce.com launched Salesforce Platform Mobile Services to deliver front and back-end services to mobile developers. And Microsoft expanded the breadth of support for Windows Azure mobile services in June. Now, Amazon hasn't formally launched a mobile backend as a service to date, but we think that their launch of a simple notification service for iOS, Android, and Kindle devices this August is really the precursor to a dedicated mobile backend as a service offering, and we expect to see that probably over the next 2 or 3 quarters. The last topic I wanted to touch upon is public cloud infrastructure as a service. Now this story, I think, is changing, has changed over the past year or so, as Amazon has really broken away from the pack. Again, it's expanding more rapidly, getting farther away from the rest of the competition. Now, aside from Google Compute Engine, who's really the biggest head-to-head competitor with Amazon, and it's still just about a year old, we think that a lot of vendors are adding the public cloud layer, not to necessarily be a public cloud infrastructure as a service competitor, but to give their customer base options. So they're really touting hybrid. A lot of these vendors, Fujitsu, IBM, HP, CSC, VMware, they all have very good hybrid cloud capabilities, and they're developing these hybrid clouds with the understanding that customers, some customers just will not and don't want to move all of their workloads to public cloud. There's definitely a place for public cloud, but the private cloud is where a lot of more mission-critical applications will go. So vendors are really increasing their share of wallet by expanding their public infrastructure as a service instead of sharing with Amazon. In April, Microsoft generally launched its infrastructure as a service as part of Azure, and is publicly committed to match AWS's prices. So yes, Microsoft Azure is also going head-to-head on price, but we think that Microsoft will really win with the hybrid cloud, as well as the end-to-end SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service. In May, VMware launched vCloud Hybrid Service, which is positioned as an extension of its software-defined data center vCloud, and enables customers to run workloads that run on VMware-supported public cloud environments. And Verizon is doing something very similar. So Verizon's new cloud is based on CloudStack. So what they're saying is that any workload that's running in a VMware virtualized environment can pretty easily move on to the Verizon platform. Whether that's true or not, I think is yet to be seen, but that will, it's another way of protecting that customer base and really getting those VMware people. Lastly, in June, IBM announced its acquisition of SoftLayer, which closed in July. And the scale that SoftLayer brings to IBM's public cloud business will really help the company in, again, diversifying its deployment options as well as open source options. SoftLayer expands its customer base. It hits on the SMB markets. It hits on bleeding edge adopters such as the gaming environment. It increases IBM's cloud-enabled data centers from 10 to 23, which is quite significant, giving the company more of a global presence in terms of cloud delivery. And it also allows IBM to support multiple open source platforms. So IBM's cloud, before SoftLayer, supported OpenStack, and IBM's a big proponent of OpenStack. And SoftLayer supports CloudStack. Now, IBM has said that SoftLayer will soon support both, but this really gives the company, more room to grow across various environments. And with that, who has the first question?
Great. Thanks, Jillian. Thanks for those of you who have sent through questions now. If you have any questions based on what Jill and Allan just presented, please send them through either the Q&A or the chat function. Okay, the first question we have, guys, is do you see much traction from Profit Bricks? They seem to be up and coming, and they have declared war against Amazon. Curious to hear your thoughts on them.
Yeah, they definitely have declared war on Amazon. I have to look into them more. I haven't heard a ton of customers adopting them, so I'm not sure if they're more of a mid-market play. But they do say that Amazon is quite profitable. So that'll be interesting to see where they come. They haven't showed up in a lot of our survey data so far. So I think there's a place for them, but I think they're, still quite a small player.
And one thing that they're doing is using price, same type of tactics that Amazon used early on with price, targeting the startup community with special programs. And so when we look at a vendor like that, a lot of our adoption research focuses on larger sets of customers. And if you look at where a lot of Amazon's big revenue comes from, it's not necessarily, yes, they do a lot of programs for smaller customers, startups, but a lot of the big deals in revenue generation comes from enterprise customers. So from that perspective, they're interesting. We're keeping our eye on them. We don't see them as an imminent market shifter in terms of really winning a lot of business away from Amazon, but there still is a lot of growth out there, particularly in the smaller segments of the market that they'll be focusing on.
Okay. The next question we have, where is the next wave of industry customization?
We really see the next wave of customization. It's on the public side. I think it's going to be a lot of pure play applications vendors, so healthcare-specific apps, life sciences, federal. I think that'll be for the smaller players. For the large players that we highlighted here, it's really going to be getting those compliances and meeting regulatory requirements in order for companies to develop on them. So I think between public and private cloud, that development layer will be key as these large industries want to develop custom applications.
Okay. So this question came through. I probably missed this, but what did you say the size of the private cloud market at? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Since it says public cloud, we might not have that data readily available.
We have for the managed private cloud, so third-party delivered private clouds. 2013, the market was about $20 billion.
Yeah.
And in 2018, it'll be around $36 billion. But that doesn't include the cloud component, so that's the third-party managed private cloud.
So that's one segment of the private cloud space. We actually have a separate benchmark in Streamer Research that breaks that market out, looks at it by the workloads, as well as the vendor performance. So there's certainly options to subscribe to that report. The other way that we're covering it is we are building out the components benchmark, which looks at, so we got the provider space covered, but for customers that are building their own private clouds, we're covering that through some of our adoption research and the components benchmark. So those are the ways that we're segmenting the market, and Jill's commentary gives you kind of an overall perspective for at least one segment of that space. It is significant, and we're building out more coverage to get at the different flavors of the private cloud space.
Okay. We actually have a bunch of questions that came through that were vendor specific, so I'm going to pose them as they came in. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on CSC, and where do you think they fit into the market? I know you mentioned them and their hybrid capabilities. Could you please expand on your thoughts?
CSC is one of the emerging players that we see that is focusing on this kind of end-to-end capability in terms of cloud delivery. So we see Microsoft, at least messaging in this vein, vendors like Verizon, focusing on this concept of being a single provider of public, private, hybrid any type of flavor of cloud that a customer could want, trying to cater to that requirement for diversity among the services that are provided, but being that single provider that can provide across that spectrum. And so I think that's, they were very early to market there. We actually see that as kind of an emerging requirement from customers. So, I think they were out early there. I think there's more, as customers migrate in that direction, more of the opportunity is moving towards that type of model. But I think it'll still take time, and that'll be something that develops over the next probably 3 years in terms of getting customers to the point where they've invested in enough disparate cloud computing resources that it makes sense for that next wave of consolidation and focus on fewer providers will really take hold and directly target the approach of the CSCs, Verizons, and Microsoft, although it's in a much more diverse offering set for them.
The next question we have is, what are your thoughts on Dell? Now that they are private, how do you see their cloud strategy developing?
I see Dell, so they've switched their cloud strategy a few times. I think what they're really going to do is go after the component space and the professional services space, as well as integration. So they've done a phenomenal job with their acquisitions, starting with Boomi I think 2010, at least a couple years ago. And that is one of the leading cloud integration platforms. And now pair that with Stratus, along with some assets from Quest, that gives them a pretty robust IT and cloud systems management portfolio. So that's a kind of close-to-the-box software platform. We also think that their security and BI, so that's, again, closer to the box. A few acquisitions, a few cloud-based acquisitions will help them. But overall, their cloud strategy will largely focus on cloud components as well as private cloud. So not so much on the public side. I think they want to be the vendor that cloud vendors buy to offer the end-user cloud.
Okay. The next question we have is ServiceNow a new entrant into your matrix? How do they differentiate themselves from the big players?
We've actually been covering ServiceNow for a while. It probably was so small before you might not have noticed the bubble. But they're differentiating not only through cloud delivery, but they differentiate because at their very core, they're a platform company. So yes, they have IT service management. That's their bread and butter offering. But it's built on such a robust platform. We think that will be the reason that they continue to succeed. So they've already started building more applications themselves on the platform. They're also going to open up that platform to large partners, so a lot of the professional services companies to develop and then sell in an app store type of environment. So the customization, the constant upgrades, they're really the first vendor that focused on ITSM after the BMCs, HP, CA. A few of those solutions became a bit outdated. Since then, all those vendors have invested quite a lot and have cloud-based interactive platforms, but ServiceNow really saw a hole and went for it.
Okay. Do you know how much of Amazon Web Services revenue and growth is coming from their parent company, Amazon.com, internal versus external?
We think, so a lot of AWS is actually tested internally. So the company does run separately, and it has to meet the very high standards of Amazon. The majority of its revenue, though, is external.
Next question we have, how do you see telcos, Verizon, AT&T, competing with traditional tech companies given their reliance on the technology providers like VMware?
So for the vendors themselves, it's funny because a huge focus that we've seen is on the telco providers, not just the big ones, the Verizon, at&T, but that overall ecosystem of managed service providers, telco service providers. They see them as a huge route to market as cloud shifts, because the requirement for their solutions certainly does not go away. However, the buying patterns and the actual purchasers are shifting quite tremendously. So for them, they are looking to be as much of a partner and a provider for those vendors as they can. So in terms of competition, I think they expect some of it on the provider side. But in the end, if they can enable their partners, the at&Ts, the Verizons, to go out and win on, efficiently selling public cloud services while they maintain a traditional license maintenance sale on the back end, that is actually a positive outcome for them. That's not something that they want to necessarily try to corner the market and be both, the biggest actual service provider and the technology provider. They are, more than happy to enable their partners to go out and compete and win in that market. In the end, I think they see room for both models, and I think, Microsoft has been perhaps the most discreet about saying they see three types of clouds. They see the public cloud, the private cloud, and in the middle they see the partner-delivered cloud. So they're actually, in their messaging, already making room for those technology service providers that are going to build off the Hyper-V, Windows platforms to deliver those, and to enable them to go out and do that, while at the same time providing some competitive capabilities in terms of their own public cloud offerings.
We have a couple more questions. I know we're officially out of time, but we have like 2 more questions. We're just going to plow through these. The next question we have is, Verizon has a new scale-out infrastructure as a service cloud in beta that guarantees network performance. Will the market see end-to-end network performance as the new buying criteria for cloud platforms?
So we haven't seen, so when we look at the drivers for adoption, the requirements, in the public cloud space, we haven't seen network performance be one of those prominent benefits or concerns for adoption. However, I think there are a number of workloads that we've looked at that have not been considered for public cloud, that have either remained on-premise or have been those candidates that have been moving to a private cloud environment, that I think that's where we would see the impact for this type of end-to-end guarantee in terms of the network performance, so that it actually enables new workloads to be shifted to cloud that weren't previously. And so when you think about the routes for growth, if there's not a big mass of greenfield customers out there that are going to be net new additions to the cloud roles for the providers, that opening up new workloads that weren't previously considered and all of a sudden can be transitioned to a cloud environment, that is one of those routes to growth. And certainly if you're Verizon, the network is one of those core attributes that you can control and leverage and benefit from. So from that perspective, I think that makes sense in terms of targeting that new area of growth that doesn't rely on new customers coming in the door. You can do more to cater to those existing public cloud adopters.
Great. And the last question we have come through, what do you think will be the killer app that drives large-scale business adoption of software as a service, the next Salesforce.com?
That's a good one. I think the next, so in terms of traditional applications, so looking at Salesforce as a CRM, I think the next workload that will really move over will probably be an HR workload, or the front end as a service, which includes a lot of HR apps. I really think that because a lot of, now with private cloud beginning to mature and customers beginning to have many more managed private cloud options, HR is the next workload after CRM that people are really comfortable moving into a public cloud. So I think it'll probably start in North America, just like Salesforce did, and then expand globally. I'm not sure if there's a specific company out there right now, but I think HR has the potential to have another Salesforce crop up around it. And the other major area where I think a player will emerge that will just dominate the market is in integration and management. So a company like a MuleSoft or a RightScale, where it's that the management, provisioning, automation, integration, those are all very, very apparent pain points now that customers have so many clouds in their IT environments, whether it be different teams adopting small instances of cloud or corporate top-down. People want cloud, they're adopting cloud, and eventually they're going to need data portability, and they're going to want automated integration and management and provisioning and prioritizing workloads. So I think someone that does all that will have great success.
Great. With that, it's time to wrap up. So I want to thank everyone that sent in your questions. If there's any other questions out there, please send them through now. We won't take them over this webinar, but we will take them as private conversations with the analyst. As I mentioned, I wanted to share all the social media links with you. So I encourage you to follow Allan, Jillian, and TBR at the Twitter handles listed here for access into what research they're working on and what they're seeing in the market. We are frequently putting out our opinions through Twitter, as well as joining the conversation on SlideShare, YouTube, and LinkedIn. All of those are listed here, and you'll be able to find additional information on research and topics we're putting out on those those URLs. On a slightly separate note, we are doing a webinar on managed cloud services on October 24th. So if there's any interest in attending that, please do join us for that. On your way out of the webinar, there is a short 3-question survey. If you have any open-ended comments on topics that we should be covering or ways that you'd like us to see us directing our research, we would like to hear that through that feedback form as well. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another few minutes in case there's any last-minute questions or comments or requests for time with the analyst. And if we don't hear from you this quarter, we will be doing this webinar again next quarter, and we will talk with you all then. So have a great afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your time.